Hey Spero Day, I'm Liz Perez, and I'm really glad to be bringing the message to you today. I'm going to be speaking on us versus them. Sometimes we call this theming or othering, and it shows up all around us. You don't have to move pretty far before bumping into it. It shows up in our politics, our spirituality, at work, and it can be things like management versus employees, or the doers versus the thinkers, or it could be the old guard versus the new guard. It could also be Republican versus Democrat, conservative versus liberal, and on and on and on. It's all around us, and we are more divided as a society now more than ever, and a large part of this is this us versus them. So I want to talk just a little bit about where this comes from, how it impacts us, how Jesus navigated it, and then if there's some pieces that we can take.
I speak my truth in love. I sing my truth in love. I walk in truth, I dream in truth. I am the truth of love.
So where does it come from? Well, us versus them usually just comes from this basic thing that's part of our humanity, which is we are given to binary thinking. We just are. We pull into black and white thinking, good or bad, right or wrong. I was cleaning up our basement and we came across this, it's like a notebook full of colorings that my son did when he was a little guy. And it was all his good guys and bad guys. And I remember thinking, I don't think we use that kind of language. And yet it would have been in every narrative, every movie, every book he was probably reading. Good guys and bad guys. And he was so drawn to that. But that's how we all can lean that way. Another thing that us versus them can come from is just a lot of times when we feel threatened. When we feel threatened, we just kind of want to feel superior. We want to kind of go, we're the smart ones. We're the good ones. We're the ones that have this all figured out. So a lot of times it comes from that. And then it also comes from just this idea of our experience and our perspective. Listen, all of us have lenses that we look through. It's just part of it. And our lenses include our age, gender, sexuality, political experience, where we were born, where we were raised. All these things influence the lens that we look through. The problem is when we just stay to our lens, when we are not able to crawl into the shoes of another person without judgment, which is empathy, then what happens is our perspective gets very limited. And what happens from there is it really takes us into a us against them or us versus them mentality. Sometimes it can be very strong and clear, but sometimes it can be very subtle. You hear it when people are saying, well, at least I don't live in that part of town. Or, her husband is on drugs. Or, their kid didn't get into college. Or it can be things like, the good people live in the country, or I think it's best to live in the city where there's variety and diversity. On and on and on. Sometimes it's even as simple as like, if you're American, you should buy American. Or sometimes it's, well, that's the news channel they watch. So it's all around us. But it also comes from groups that we are either in or we join. This can also be a big part of it. As a human race, we have an impulse to choose sides. It's just innate. Psychologists point to our desire to be safe by joining groups with which we have an affinity. Now, this gives us security, but it also really supports our vanity. We want to think of ourselves as better or smarter. And these traits, they're just ingrained in us. Be it good or bad, we are clannish beings. We find groups, crews, organizations to join, be part of, and also to define us. Now, I was raised Catholic originally. My childhood was Catholic. I do remember one time when I was in some kind of religion class, the teacher, I specifically remember her saying, now listen, children, if you ever walk into a Baptist church, you are going to go to hell. Which is frightening. Ask me if I ever stepped into the doors of a Baptist church, at least up to age 19. I did not. What's really humorous is that a couple years ago I was leading a group here at Spero Day, and I was sharing that story, and a gentleman raised his hand and he said, guess what? I was raised Baptist, and I was told if I ever set foot in a Catholic church, I was going to hell. So kind of high-fived each other, right? It's this shame and fear sometimes that is meant to keep us in line, but what it does is it also creates this division, this I'm good, you're bad, right? And for many years, I was part of a ministry, and ministries in particular, but my first ministry that I was part of taught me that the Bible is without error, Jesus is the only way to God, homosexuality is a sin, the world needs to be saved, sex is moral and not personal, and by the way, I better save myself or I'm damaged goods, save myself for marriage. Sins must be confessed. I cannot trust my thoughts, my emotions, or my body. Women should not teach except for other women and children. There's only one way to connect with God, and that is through reading the Bible daily, and only Republicans can be Christians. Wow, that's a lot. And there was more, by the way. And the idea is, within this group, that defined us. If you believed it and aligned with it, you're in. If you did not believe it or align with it, you're out. And that's what I mean as far as these groups that we can be part of, right? That pull us into us against them. Now, I do want to say this. There's parts of this that are not only human, as I mentioned, but are okay and healthy. When we think of our immigrants that used to come across the ocean, go through Ellis Island, come into our country with just a few belongings, the first thing they usually were looking for is, where are my people? That's why a lot of the cities along the East Coast, especially our bigger cities, there's the Jewish section and the Italian section and, the Polish section and on, because they were like, where's my people? That I speak the same language as, that I eat the same food, that I worship the same, whatever. We feel at home when we are with like-minded people, and that is good. It really is. But theming and othering can also be really, really harmful. And I just want to take a minute to talk about that. First of all, it isolates us. It isolates us and it divides us. This concept and the ministries and the groups that I've been part of have literally limited the people that I got to be acquainted with, that I got to grow with or be around. The very first group in ministry I was ever part of was so limited that it was only filled with people that believed in Jesus and those that were interested. That was it. Now, luckily, other ministries that David and I have been part of through the years have gotten a little less rigid, but still, they are very defined. They have their own culture and are very defined. And I lost out on being with so many people that were different than me, that would have stretched my intellect, my emotions, my experiences, would have made me more compassionate and empathetic. And I lost out on that because I was within groups. The social media filter bubble, a term coined by internet activist Eli Perez, and his TED Talk went viral, and it was the one where he began to talk about an echo chamber. And he says this about an echo chamber. He says it's a personal, unique universe of information that you live in online. And what's in your filter bubble depends on who you are, and depends on what you do, and we also know what you purchase. But the thing is that you don't get to decide what gets in, and more importantly, you don't actually see what gets edited out. And our biases keep getting reinforced. The other thing that us versus them leads to is a lack of empathy for those that are different from me. We do have neuroscience research right now that is looking into this us versus them mentality. And when we pull into that, we are seeing that what happens within our brain is basically signals are sent so that when a them or they is hurting, we have less empathy. That is really scary. That is really sobering. And then the other thing about us versus them is that we overestimate the pervasiveness of our own perspective. Our own perspective. Reinforcement bubbles can lead us to mistakenly believe that more people support our worldview than is a reality. I love this quote by Anne Lamott. She says, "You can safely assume you've created God in your own image, when it turns out that God hates all the same people you do. And lastly, I want to say this about othering. It can be very dangerous because at first what's happening with us versus them is there's categorization happening. But then that leads to dehumanizing. And then that ultimately leads to hate crimes. And you might think, whoa, Liz, that's a huge leap. I promise you, whenever you go and study hate crimes and you travel back, it all started with us versus them. And here's what's fascinating about Jesus. When you read the scriptures, he was swimming in all of this all the time. Jesus truly was our first deconstructionist. He was always pushing back on black and white thinking, us versus them. You know, he was always pushing back on rigid Old Testament laws that didn't support with grace and love and mercy. He was often saying, you've heard it said, and he would quote the Torah, but then he would also say, but I call you to, and it was usually a higher love ethic. So he was always pulling people out of black and white and bringing them to a higher place of love. He was always stretching and evolving his Jewish followers who, like him, would have been raised and steeped in Jewish law. Multiple times he chooses to heal on the Sabbath. He eats with corrupt tax collectors. In Luke 7, he allows a prostitute to wash his feet with expensive perfume and wipe his feet with her hair. These would not have been right in his culture at all. He was always leveling the playing ground of who's in and who's out by challenging the religious laws that left no room for forgiveness, grace, repentance, mercy, and second chances. One of the ways that he was always pushing against this was how he engaged with women. He would talk to them directly instead of speaking to them through their husband or their father, who in that culture would have been their head male ship, like their leader. He was always breaking that culture. When the hemorrhaging woman touched his garment to be healed, he didn't rebuke her. He touched her and he praised her for her faith and he set her free. In John 4, when he meets the Samaritan woman at the well, he breaks two norms. He speaks to a woman and he speaks to a Samaritan. Jews hated Samaritans. In fact, they often called them half-breeds, and they would rather go back around. Instead of coming through Samaria, they would rather walk through the Jordan River than be around Samaritans. There would have been much judgment on a rabbi speaking to this Samaritan woman, but when we find out also that she has a shameful reputation, this even heightens it more. And yet Jesus has the longest personal theological conversation with her that is recorded in Scripture. It is tender, it is frank, and it's a conversation that leads her to become a follower of his, and then many from her community, and then moves Jesus and his people to stay in that city for 2 more days. That's pretty cool. All of these actions would have gone against any norm for a Jewish rabbi. It's one of the reasons that the Pharisees were always watching him and very nervous about his teaching, because Jesus was always popping out the bubbles of his time. And it's almost as if you could experience when you read the scriptures that the Jewish leaders would have been looking over at him going, this is us, and that is them. Jesus and his followers became them. Now, it's frightening to leave one group for another. It really is. David and I often sit outside in our backyard, and we always point to the spot where we would sit and just talk about David's dream of a place like Spero Day. And I wish that I could tell you that when he would share that with me, I would say, this is amazing. When do we get started? But there was a lot of tears. There were a lot of tears, and it all came from fear. It was very frightening for me. I remember saying to him, well, I've never seen a church like this before, and could you still have a job? And would people come to this church? And my poor sweet husband knows that once I've jumped on the fear train, I am going to take it through all the spine-chilling, hair-raising stations along the way. I just have to. And so he had to hear about, what if there's people across the street hurling horrific things, saying horrible things about our people? What if your safety is at stake? What if we lose all of our friends and our family? And on and on. Now, one thing that my husband knows about me is I got to get on the fear train. But once I've been allowed on the fear train, I usually can circle back around and go, okay, let's go. And I want to say here, in my white heterosexual experience, I have no idea what it is like to come out to family or friends about my sexuality, nor have I ever had the experience of walking into a room and then going, oh, is my skin color going to work in here? I do not know how scary, how awful any of those things are. But this was my experience at the time, and it really was very frightening. And really what was happening for me is I was counting the cost and beginning the grieving process. I was counting the cost of, this has been a community for me. These have been my people that I have memories with and relationships with and traditions and all these things. And what is it going to be like if all of that is lost? And I will say, those of you that call Spero Day your home, most of you have had some kind of experience like this. In fact, many of you are at Spero Day because you just couldn't take the us versus them mentality anymore. It was too rigid and laced with shame and fear and rejection. And as I said earlier, it can be beautiful and healthy to be around people that love and accept you and resonate with you. That's awesome, right? We have people that come into this sanctuary and they feel safe immediately, or their bodies just let out a sigh of relief. And that doesn't get lost on David and I. We often drive home on Sundays and just go, we love this place. I sometimes come into this sanctuary in the middle of the week when it's quiet, and I just sit here and breathe and pray and usually smile. Because this place, though we love how the sanctuary turned out, it is so symbolic for so many things that, again, have come at a cost for many of us. And it represents all the stories of us that sit in this room and those that watch also online. But we have to be aware that we can still fall into othering. In fact, for us, it could actually be called reverse fundamentalism, which we don't want to do. We can be caught up in, we're the ones that have figured this out. We're the ones that still value the Bible and yet consider its context. We're the ones that are recovering from purity culture and reclaiming healthy sexuality. We're the ones that are learning to trust ourselves and our thoughts and our emotions. We're the ones that are connecting with our Maker through the Bible, but also through art and nature and whatever other way we want to connect with God. We are no longer binary thinkers. We love in deeper ways than we ever thought were possible. We are open and affirming, and on and on and on. And by the way, these are beautiful things for us. And they're meaningful values. Again, some have come at a cost, but we can hold our convictions strongly and cherish them without having to compare ourselves to others. Whenever we're comparing sideways or up and down, it always comes from insecurity. But when we allow ourselves to rest in our true identity, it needs no defense, no comparison. We are able to hold our values with confidence, stand up for what matters to us, and not have to draw an invisible line between us and what others think differently. This is challenging, especially if we've been hurt by other groups, but I personally don't want to end up on the other side. Fundamentalism to reverse fundamentalism, where by arrogance I'm propping myself up because of my own insecurity or fear of rejection. So, as I kind of wrap this up, there's a couple things I just want to share. There's a couple lists that I want to put out there. I hope are helpful for you. So that you do not create your own echo chamber, your own little bubble, or move into reverse fundamentalism, here's a couple things to consider. First, Be around people that are different from you. Period. Second, when you're around people that are different from you, ask them about their life, what they love and care about, what has hurt them, when have they been rejected or experienced loss. These are the places that we begin to experience common humanity, where the differences kind of melt away. And then third, this is just my encouragement. If you are engaging with people that think different than you and they want to talk about those differences, make sure it's people that can employ compassion, curiosity, and non-judgment. And then I have some recommendations for those of us that are moving possibly from one group to another. By the way, this may apply in other situations with family, at work. You apply it however you want to. But these are some ways that we can care for ourselves. Don't overshare about your new life. Period. You get to have healthy boundaries to protect your most vulnerable feelings and choices. Many of us come from cultures where we were encouraged, confess and confess all. And so it gets confusing for us if we hold back. Am I being deceptive? Am I keeping secrets? There is a difference between secrets and my privacy, which is sacred. The other thing is, stop trying to change their feelings and thoughts about your new choices. And by the way, they will have feelings and thoughts. They can have their emotions about your choices, and it is not your job to help them feel differently. And then third, don't look to your old group to give you what they can't or won't, like acceptance, approval, care, whatever. Allow yourself to grieve and eventually accept the reality of their limitations. I mentioned earlier I was afraid of losing friends and family over our church here at Spero Day. It has happened, for sure, and there is grief and loss there. And yet, boundaries for me are also not going back to an old community or group wanting things that they can't or won't give. So, I want to end with this. And this is an encouragement you can do on your own. When you have a moment, I'd love for you to try this. In fact, I'll lead you through it now. You can always come back to this and try it again. This is a visualization meditation. Visualization can be really helpful in helping us to shift, especially internally. So, give this a try. If you want to close your eyes to help, choose to visualize someone who has othered you. Once you have that person in front of you, in your mind, feel all that arises within you. Whether it's anger, hurt, loneliness, fear, rejection, not being understood, whatever comes up. Notice what comes up. Notice even where you feel that in your body. Now I want you to notice their humanity. Notice how they're human, whether it's reminding yourself that they want to be loved, they want to be accepted, they want to belong, they want to have security, whatever. Take a moment just to remember their humanity. Now, put yourself in the other person's shoes. You're going to go crawl on the other side, looking back at yourself, and see yourself from their perspective. Notice what shows up. There may be judgment. There might be fear, concern, confusion. There might be other things. Just notice what shows up. Now I want you to come back to yourself. Looking back at them, and quietly to yourself, or if you're at home alone, you can say this out loud, to you and to this other person. I don't have to explain or win you or convince. I don't have to change how you think or feel about me. I am enough. And now what I want you to wonder and just notice is, in your body or in your emotions, in your whole system, does anything feel different? By the way, this is something you can come back to and try over and over again. Great to be with you, Spero Day. Let me pray. God, I know I have been part of othering when I'm insecure or I feel threatened. And I always feel so sad afterwards. I pray that you would help me and the rest of the Spero Day community to hold passionately to what we believe and what we are about. And at the same time, to have confidence that we're enough. We don't have to over-explain or defend. I am so grateful, God, that you are in this place and amongst our people. Grow us in love, mercy, compassion. It's in your name we pray. Amen. Great to be with you.
Looks like we made it. Look how far we've come, my baby. I might have took the long way, but we knew we'd get there someday. They said, I bet they'll never make it, but just look at us holding on. We're still together, still going strong. Still the one, you're still the one I run to, the one that I belong to. You're still the one I want for life. Still the one, you're still the one that I love, the only one I dream of, still the one I kiss goodnight. Still the one, ain't nothing better. We beat the odds together. I'm glad we didn't listen. Look at what we would be missing. They say, I bet they'll never make it, but just look at us holding on. We're still together, still going strong. You're still the one, I'm still the one I